Hey there, it's Kat Kinsman, Executive Features Editor at Food & Wine, and this fall, we're launching the new Food & Wine Classic in Charleston with our partners at Southern Living and Travel + Leisure, and we want to see you there. Join us September 27th through the 29th to learn from iconic chefs, share a glass with innovative wine experts, and experience Charleston with one-of-a-kind events. Tickets are on sale now at foodandwine.com/Charleston Classic. That's foodandwine.com/Charleston Classic. See you down in Charleston.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org. This is Capri Cafaro, host of Eat Your Heartland Out. This week, you'll meet Katie Riggs-Johnson, one of the superstar women behind Ladybird Brewing. Katie and her partner, Laura Riggs-Johnson, bring a sense of community to their Main Street brewery in Winfield, Kansas. And we'll also revisit an episode from the archives with Wisconsin-based Mary Pelletieri, founder of Top Note Tonic. That's all next. Katie, I am so excited for you to join the program and share all of the good stuff about Ladybird Brewing.
Yeah, I am pumped to be here today. We're really proud of what we've done and accomplished and all the things we're looking forward to. So I'm excited to be able to share that.
Yeah, and you have such an incredible story and journey because, brewing is a passion and you have this incredible brewery, but you actually have a day job too.
Yeah, it's a bit of a juggling act, but things that I really care a lot about, and working for my college here in our town, and that's definitely a part of my mission and my heart. So it's hard to let go of that work, and so we've just made it work that we could do both those things. And so and my wife Laura is an attorney here. She practices primarily family law. And then, of course, the brewery is like the most intense side hustle, but it brings us a lot of joy, and we're really proud of it. So it makes it easy to do.
Yeah, well, it's just the most intense side hustle, but something that you both really love for sure. Why brewing? Why decide to get into this hobby and then ultimate side hustle?
Yeah, so Laura, in her former life, before she went to law school, she was a winemaker, and
oh, cool.
Yeah, and when she started law school, she sort of had this itch to continue to create in that way, and brewing, sourcing ingredients for beer making is a bit easier in many regards, and having some control, and the turnaround is faster. We both had an intense love for craft beer, and were consumers of craft beer and lovers of local breweries. And so, and I, in college, my first experiences with the craft brew scene were in Fort Collins, Colorado, and hanging out in tap rooms.
Yep. With
my college roommate who was from Fort Collins, and just developed this love for the community that craft breweries can create. And so when we were homebrewing very early on, we were pretty committed to this concept of what if we brought a great brewery to our main street, to our hometown. And we sort of set out on that journey with that intention from very early on in our homebrewing days. My background is in marketing, communications, development work, and Laura with her background in winemaking, and she'd started a business. It seemed very possible from the beginning for us, and then it just seemed like there was a place on our main street for us, so it wasn't hard to imagine. And then we just started working that way.
So tell me about that main street vibe, because I know that the concept of, a brewery as a space of community is something that is really important to both you and Laura.
Yeah. So, this is our hometown. Winfield is a place that we're really proud of. And so yeah, when we were thinking of where we would want our brewery to be, and how we'd want it to situate within our community, there was no other option for us than Main Street. It is the front porch of our community, and so we started looking at properties. I think we started on Google Maps and just the sort of satellite imaging and looking at where would we want to be, and the kind of space we wanted to create, and that's ultimately how we ended up with our old filling station that was built in 1953 on Main Street and had kind of turned into a brake and tire shop through the years, but it provided the right kind of lot and the right kind of orientation, and it was on the right sort of side of our Main Street that we wanted to be in, and it was very early on. We knew that was the spot. So
that's awesome. Now, what about your brewing style? What kind of things can folks expect to see on tap and taste on tap if they come to visit?
Yeah, so we like clean beers that are provide interest but are refreshing. So you won't see us making very high ABV, intense barley wines. It's not something we're generally doing. We like beers that are quite approachable but interesting, and so we layer that with interesting ingredients that we can source, sometimes locally. That's certainly our preference when we can get our hands on ingredients that are coming from our neck of the woods, and making beers that just are easy to enjoy, and sometimes stretching our consumers, our neighbors who are coming to drink, and enjoy a beer. We want them to it to be a unique experience. So our menu board is constantly rotating. The closest thing we have to a flagship is probably a foreign extra stout. It's called Moondial, that we will bring back because when it goes off the board, there's a small riot in town. So we do bring, it goes off. We kind of force it off the board for a while, and then we'll bring it back. And so, but most of the time, every beer is just changing. It's sort of a fleeting experience. And so, and that's part of it too. I think if, for us, it's the creativity is really important to us, and we enjoy, there's a lot to be said for breweries that have flagships and they're able to consistently produce a product that time after time, people can expect a certain experience. And, for us, because the nature of our tap room and because we have full-time jobs, we're not a production brewery. We want to create and make things that are interesting every time we brew. And we're constantly tinkering with, our base malts and hops we're securing. And because we're also at a scale where we can do that.
Yeah.
We produce 5 barrels of beer at a time. And so it's we're definitely, we're interested in exploring flavors and presenting new styles to our consumers, but we always want to stay in this, this sort of drinkability space where it's enjoyable, where when you put your glass down, you're having a conversation and it's easy to pick it back up and take another drink. It's not, it's not too pressing or too challenging to the palate. And so it's conversational beer. That's the way, we're about creating community. And so in order to do that, you got to create a product that is interesting but enjoyable.
What is that palate to you? What is interesting but enjoyable and drinkable?
Yeah. So, I think when we do free tasters, and so we frequently have folks come into our tap room who, this is going to be the first time they've ever come to a craft brewery. And so when they walk in, I'll ask them, we may start the conversation with, what kind of beers do you generally enjoy? And a lot of times, domestic light beers are what they're going to say. And so it's easy for us to start, sort of on the lighter side of our board and say, well, if you like that kind of beer, you might enjoy this. But what if, have you ever tried, do you like, for instance, Coca-Cola or cold brew coffee? And if I can get them to say yes to that, then I might throw our Moon Dial for an extra stout at them, because to me, it has a similar kind of flavor profile. It's kind of got this this nice bitterness, but it's on a nice backbone of roasted, and kind of sometimes there's a nuance of chocolate and or like dried raisins even sometimes, and it's nicely carbonated, but it's not a heavy beer. It still feels pretty light on your palate, and so that's been, and I think that's why that beer is so popular, is because it feels so different and so exciting to people who are generally domestic light beer drinkers, but they still enjoy it a great deal. And so it feels sort of exotic and different. And when they get a glass of it and they set it on the table, it's this rich, dark looking beer, but it's still very enjoyable, and they can go back to it, and pick it up and drink it, and without feeling, too challenged. But it looks interesting, and it smells rich and roasted, and but yeah, it's just still very drinkable. So I think, making choices about our beers and the ingredients that we're using, sort of layering ingredients in a way that elevates them, but they still are, it's not too much. It's not overwhelming to the palate. So.
Yeah. So let's talk about ingredients. You mentioned a little bit before that, your preference is to utilize local ingredients. And you also mentioned that kind of getting the components for beers, sometimes a little bit more accessible than wine, at least in your partner's experience. How do you source your ingredients and go through that process of identifying, what works, what doesn't, and what you can get locally versus, out of state or out of the region?
Yeah. So when we were home brewing, I will say we brewed a lot with herbs, and that's primarily because I grow a lot of herbs. We have a large herb garden that we grow. We live on a small piece of land just south of Winfield, and so that's kind of where that started. It was interesting to work with things that we were growing. And then we're fortunate we have hop growers here in Kansas, Kansas Hop Company. And so it's fun to work with. And in fact, right now they are harvesting hops here in Kansas. And so they were just messaging me earlier about getting some fresh hops to potentially work with if we can make it work in our production schedule. So, we're really fortunate that we have local growers who are willing to share. We also split our property. We have some friends who run a great little farm just north of Winfield, and they're exceptional farmers. They grow all sorts of interesting produce, and this year they're harvesting lots of, they've got some orchard space, and so lots of pears and apples. And so we're like we're pumped because they haven't had great harvests for the last couple of years, but we're thinking, how can we incorporate some of that into our beer? And again, it's interesting. And for our local consumer, it's a point of pride. And so to be able to share products that are grown here and cared about here, and elevate them, and celebrate them through, and packaging them in beer is really exciting to people. So when we can do that, we are trying to make it happen.
How cool. I mean, and I got to go back to this concept of brewing with herbs, because we don't necessarily think about, botanicals in beer. What is that like? And if you go today, would we be able to taste something like that at Ladybird?
I don't know that we have any. I don't know if we don't have anything on right now, but we are. So when we were home brewing, I grew a ton of French varietal lavender, and so we would use that. We have some like lemongrass right now. We have a beer right now that we're contemplating crushing some lemongrass and adding to. It is just, again, it's just it's a layer of flavor that you can create in beer. That people, maybe don't typically identify in beer, but I think herbs are such an interesting, they offer aromatics, they offer flavor compounds that pair really nicely with sometimes the breadiness, or if you're using more like kind of cracker, kind of snappy malts, then you can layer on really nice flavors with herbs when appropriate. And the challenge is always actually just figuring out how to control the sort of the strength or the potency of the herbs as you're introducing to the beer. And there's also different moments within the brewing process and then the fermentation process where you can play with herbs and introduce those flavors. And so making choices along the way as we're bringing a beer to life it's just really interesting. And again, at our scale, we have the space and the ability to kind of play with that in different moments, and trial and error is definitely a piece of our puzzle. And so, yeah, it's been fun, but there's, we've done some stuff with Thai basil before. Again, it's just what you find enjoyable about herbs. The thing I think is interesting is trying to the freshness of herbs when you first, trying to preserve that and carry that across to beer is really interesting. But it's just another layer of, hops are primarily what we're using for aromatics and bitterness, and those sort of, they can deliver a lot of different flavor compounds depending on the variety, depending on, when you're introducing them in the brewing process. And so herbs can do the same thing.
For people that are not familiar with the brewing process, maybe you can talk a little bit about, you've mentioned this, like when you introduce certain ingredients into the brewing process. Can you walk us through kind of what that process looks like, and maybe when you might change up when you introduce certain ingredients? I know that might be a pretty broad question, but not everybody is familiar with the brewing process.
Sure. So, the brewing process, it starts with really malt selection and water. We use our water is locally sourced. We have a spring-fed lake near Winfield, and so we're fortunate to have a good source of water that has a nice minerality to it that we can work with. So then comes malt. So we're selecting different base grains, and then sort of aromatic and specialty grains to layer flavors. And a lot of times we're, using, a two-row barley is going to be our base. And then we may choose differently malted, grains to create different flavors. And mouthfeel too is another key piece of that. So when you've got your malt or your grains selected and your water, then it becomes, you essentially steep these grains, and that's called the mash process. So you mash in, and you want the water to be at a very specific temperature when you mash, and your mash mixture to be at a certain temperature, because we're trying to extract very specific compounds and sugars from the grain, and so it's essentially like steeping tea. And what you're collecting is a sugary wort. That's what that liquid is called. And it's very syrupy and sweet, and it's delicious. And it's the right kind of sort of fuel for the yeast. It's got all the right, protein compounds and sugars that our yeast are going to want to consume once they make it to the fermenter. So we collect that wort, we put it in the boil kettle. And at that moment, you bring the temperature up, and as soon as the wort would hit the boil kettle, you could potentially start adding hops based on, early hop additions are typically for bitterness. Late hop additions during the boil process are more aromatic. You're getting more of the flavor compounds. You're extracting different oils from the hop product. So, and similarly, you could choose to add herbs during that time as well. A lot of times you'll see, different beers may have, let's say orange zest or lemon zest. Some folks would add that during that boil time, probably later in the boil. Most breweries are probably boiling their wort for an hour to 90 minutes, kind of depending on, where you're wanting your ABV to land, because you are boiling off some water. So there's sort of a distillation process happening there, but you're also killing any bacteria during that time that you wouldn't want to come across the beer. But there's also your malt is undergoing some change, and certainly your hops are while they're under that intense heat. And then once you finish a boil, there's a transfer process, and your beer is going to be cooled and land in a fermenter. And so that's another moment while the beer is in fermentation where you can add, there's a term that you may hear. It's often beers would be, it's used for marketing, is they may talk about dry hopping or double dry hopping. And that is in the fermenter. So that means that's the addition of hops once they're in fermentation. And again, brewers are making decisions about when they're adding those hops in the fermentation process. And it's stylistic. They're making choices based on what kinds of flavor compounds they want to extract from those hops. And, generally when we dry hop, we like very late hop additions when the beer is nearly finished, because we don't like the finished beer to sit on the vegetal matter of the hop for too long, because there's the potential that you would, extract some of those flavors rather than the sort of, the very aromatic and flavorful oils. So, but that's also a moment where we have introduced herbs or additional fruits, or, there's just those sort of, there's moments in that fermentation process where it becomes appropriate to add, various ingredients. And so, it's that there's so many moments and so many decisions made on any beer you would try in a craft brewery. It's easy to sort of have a standardized approach to beer and the production of beer, but it is also really fun to sort of manage all these variables and to think about them in really creative ways. And so that's certainly one of the things we love about brewing and making beer, is that you can make, there's so many decisions along the way. It's like painting a picture, and, choosing, making artistic choices about the, where and how you're working with these agricultural products to make something that's really cohesive, and really beautiful. So that's the fun of, I think, beer production. And I think as consumers of beer, sometimes it's, the battle for me is somebody who really loves that process, and then also just loves the idea of somebody coming in and just getting a beer off tap and not having to dive too deep into all the details of it, but just knowing like, hey, this is really good and I really enjoy it. And I hope that our consumers, when they walk in, they walk past, they see all of our fermenters, they see our brewing equipment. And we try to give tours and talk about our process for folks who are interested. But I want somebody to come in and that doesn't matter. Ultimately, they end up with this product in their glass that they really enjoy. And again, lends to conversation and sort of building community or connection with someone that they're there with. And that's enough for me. So it kind of depends, I guess, what level of interest you have in beer, or if it's more of just sort of a vessel for, hanging out, and that's fine too.
Right. Well, either way, for you as a brewer, like you said, this is an artistic process. And, you really did a great job painting a picture of what that process can look like and does look like behind the scenes for folks that, are just drinking it and have no idea how it gets from point A to point B. So that was, I think, incredibly helpful, and has to be a really gratifying process for you to be able to make those artistic decisions as you go through with trial and error and probably, a lot of science and chemistry.
Yeah. I did certainly glaze over some of the, as you think about, we're monitoring pH and we're checking the health of our yeast cells. There's lots of that's happening along the way, but those are just really checkpoints that then inform those artistic decisions. I think as we're crafting beer. So yeah, it's an incredible process, and one that we find a lot of enjoyment in, and I hope that ultimately our consumers feel that or sense that when they come into our tap room and try our beers.
I can only imagine that they would. And I was just recently in Kansas and feel bad I didn't get a chance to visit your tap room. But if people are, in Kansas or looking for an adventure, how can they find you, and when are you open? Because as you said, this is a side hustle, so it's not necessarily regular hours.
Sure. Yeah. So we are only open on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. And occasionally we do some Sunday pop-ups, and we have private events, sort of scattered throughout the week, generally speaking. But our tap room, we're open 3 days a week, and they can, I would encourage folks to visit our website. It's ladybird.beer. And you can find our hours and information about how to visit our tap room there. But also we have a pretty active social media accounts. We're constantly sharing about if they're interested in that brewing process. Usually we've got something going on in our story on brew days so people can kind of see the behind the scenes. So pay attention to our Instagram. You can find us at Ladybird Brewing. And it's a great space. And again, we're really proud of the sort of community that has formed around us as we've opened and have been, we're about to roll into 3 years of the brewery. And of course we've been brewing for much longer than that, but, it's become like a really great space for our community and for us to share. So hopefully folks will come see us. Yeah.
I'm sure they will. And if I get back to Kansas, I will as well. So thank you so much for sharing your story and so much of your knowledge about beer. We really appreciate it. And we'll definitely keep an eye on what Ladybird is doing.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Capri. Yeah, we're doing all sorts of stuff. So yeah, thanks again.
This is Eat Your Heartland Out with me, Capri Cafaro. After the break, I'm going to dip into the Eat Your Heartland Out archives to share an interview with another superstar woman in the beverage industry. Stick around for highlights from my interview with Top Note Tonic's Mary Pelletieri next.
This episode is supported by HRN Business member Crew, a sophisticated Thai restaurant serving historic dishes inspired by Thailand's royalty and aristocracy in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Crew recreates and reimagines historic dishes from ancient recipes that are marked by their surprising openness to worldly ingredients. Visit KRUBROOKLYN.com to learn more and make a reservation. Crew supports HRN's creative educational reporting and storytelling that drive conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place.
Welcome back to Eat Your Heartland Out. I'm your host, Capri Cafaro. Before the break, I was speaking with Katie Riggs Johnson, co-founder of Ladybird Brewing in Winfield, Kansas, about her journey from home brewing to opening her own brewery right in the middle of her hometown. My chat with Katie inspired me to reach back into the Eat Your Heartland Out archives to share some of a recent interview I did with Mary Pelletieri. During this interview, Mary told me about her own journey, from being in the early wave of female craft beer brewers to founding her own craft tonic and soda company in 2017. Here's some of my conversation with Mary now. Take a listen. Mary, thank you for taking the time to join Eat Your Heartland Out.
Thank you all for having me. I'm very excited to do this interview.
Well, you have quite a storied career and one that is pretty unique. We don't hear often about women in brewing, women maybe making their own tonics as you're doing now. Particularly, I think when you originally started your career. So let's go back. Once upon a time, Mary was interested in brewing. Go.
Yeah, so I'm one of these unusual creative people that found myself in science years ago, and just found the problem solving and the world of science more interesting than my ability to draw. Um, but of course, because I was such a nerd of food and beverage, I found myself creating quite a bit. And long ago, I used to create my own home brew in my basement. And that was something that kind of spurred me into the world of brewing as a professional. It took probably about 5 years before I got my first job, and then another 3 years after that, all the time going to college and graduate school. And I found myself at Goose Island Beer and was the quality manager there, as well as the director of R&D. So I've long been kind of dabbling in food and beverage all my life. But I found myself more attracted to beverage and the categories of beverage: wine, beer, alcohol, spirits, and non-alcohol for that matter. Non-alcoholic drinks were always interest to me. When I was pregnant with my first son at Goose Island, I couldn't tell anyone, of course, those first few months. And of course, you still have to go to bars. And I found myself very frustrated with the non-alcoholic selections. The most standard bars, it was, at least back then, 20 years ago, a bit of this isn't very important. We're just going to hide this kind of behind the soda gun and no one will really know what it is. And I found myself ordering tonic water just because it was slightly bitter and had more of an adult flavor. But when I looked at, the ingredients and the calories and everything, I thought, well, geez, tonic water isn't necessarily a healthy drink, but someone should fix that someday. I thought of it that moment. And it's that conversation in my head has never left me. And, I continued my career in beer. I worked for Miller Coors for some time. I moved to Milwaukee and found myself just wanting that entrepreneurial kind of spark again. I had spent so much time with great craft brewers across the country when I was at Goose Island, and just really was inspired by their stories and thought, I really kind of want this tonic water thing to happen. And at the time, people were starting to make tonic waters as syrups, and you started seeing those in bars and restaurants. So it was a good time to kind of jump and try to do it myself. And we did. We started as basically in farmers markets, making cocktail syrups, really tonic syrups in various formats, and getting good consumer feedback, right here in the Midwest of Milwaukee. And we kind of from there decided to launch Top Note as a sparkling beverage.
And I mean, you've really summed it up. I mean, usually if you ask the question, once upon a time, go, people just go all over the place. You were succinct and really gave me the 30,000 foot level. I mean, and what a storied career, as I said, that it's been. And I think you've touched on something I think really important, and one that you obviously were ahead of the curve on too, because now there is this real interest in no and low alcohol drinks, alcohol-free cocktails. This is a massive trend. And it really has emerged, I think, even more so post-pandemic. How have you seen the interest in your tonic beverages maybe evolve since you started?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I just heard a stat this morning. 1 of 7 drinks served in the bars and restaurants, 1 of 7 is going to be non-alcoholic. which, instead of ordering a cocktail or wine or beer, people are choosing to order something that's non-alcoholic in terms of a mixed drink. And it has challenged bartenders coming out of COVID. I think it was starting pre-COVID, but the health and wellness kind of movement that the pandemic inspired certainly helped to create more demand. And bartenders, I think themselves, starting to drink less. I think that
Yep.
also began to happen because COVID gave us way too much time on our hands, um,
Right.
in a good and a bad way. So I
Hmm.
do think there was some opportunity that really was driven because of the pandemic. And concurrently, you have Gen Z coming to drinking age. And Gen Z, I have two Gen Zers at home. Neither of them are officially of drinking age, but they don't really imbibe, and they've been
Hmm.
around alcohol of all of their young lives.
Makes
Really, because I
sense.
was making beer, I had Goose Island at home from a very from their very young age. My current partner sells wine, and we have wine, open bottles nearly every night. They just aren't that interested. And I remember being that age and being a little interested. I wasn't a
Right.
huge drinker, but I remember being interested. And certainly the stats are supporting my personal experience at home with what we're seeing from Gen Z. They're finding other alternatives, we'll just say, but they're
Right.
also just they're not that interested in being out of control. From my
Hmm.
understanding, Gen Z has a almost social phobia because of these phones, these devices that we have in our hands all the
Fair
time,
enough.
and they have captured much of their lives. Say on in social, so you've got that as well. So I think there's a combination of health, wellness, Gen Zers for their various reasons, not really wanting to imbibe terribly heavy. So you have these kind of zebra opportunities. And I don't think it's just Gen Z. I think you see millennials
Yes.
as, and for different reasons, as well as Gen Xers, and even baby boomers choosing to
Yep.
drink a sober drink occasionally or stay sober all night, because they have a
Yeah.
big presentation the next day, or they need to, they want to get up and run, for whatever
Right.
reason. They're all there's multiple generations and multiple reasons there, but there's truly movement, and that
No
has changed.
question.
Your question was what has changed. Well, that is it. There's this trend, and the trend is driving folks to choose to look at what they're mixing specifically with. And frankly, the large CPG brands that take 40 feet up in the grocery stores aren't necessarily cutting it for what people want to mix and make something that's uh, alcohol like, or maybe a replacement for a moment of the day in which they normally slowed down and thought
Right.
about what they were sipping. So that seems to be the key driver, is people really want to still think about flavor. They still are seeking that adult beverage, time and space and flavor, and that's where mixers and really high quality tonic waters, as well as mixers, come into play. So that's the space we're
So
playing.
very well said. I mean, I think that you brought up so many really important points just in what you were saying, that you have multiple generations for their own variety of reasons, looking to indulge less in alcohol, looking for these no and low options, so to speak, but they still want that sort of Calgon take me away moment. I'm dating myself. But but you know what I mean, right? It's, as you were just saying, they want that time and space, to have that kind of, your happy hour, your moment where you kind of unwind. But maybe they don't necessarily want the effects of alcohol. So they're looking for something that is quality. And that is obviously where you come in. And I can imagine that there's a lot of work and research that goes into making this kind of a quality product. you said at the beginning of our conversation that you're somebody that was interested in science and then kind of got into brewing and all the rest of this, and were applying some of those skills to this industry. How has kind of the laboratory, if you will, played into how you develop your formulas? Because that's really what they are.
Yeah, it plays a big role. Beverage companies, there are lots of hurdles, obviously, to get started, but one of the hurdles that you would think most beverage brands would have to deal with is formulation, and some just farm it out. They can hire an R&D firm, or more often they just hire a flavor company to do the formulation for them. We, at the start, had our syrups that we were hand making from herbs, and juices and different types of sugars and acids. And we passed those formulas onto an R&D company and said, help us design these into ready to serve, soft drinks. So they gave us kind of the basic blocking and tackling. And after that, we've always created our own formulas. It comes obviously with some risk, because it's just me, my co-founder, who also was a home brewer. We have now years and years of beverage experience. I think it's going on 40 between the two of us. But that's that's still, you always take on a little bit of risk when you start your own company. So
of course,
because we have a tiny company and we're kind of reliant on our own palates, we start, and sometimes we tweak flavors to hit them right. But that's yes, it's a formulation. It still requires multiple testings. I remember when we were kind of reformulating our ginger beer, because we didn't like how it was, the shelf stability in the bottle at the initial stages. So we pulled out all the different flavors, and we had like 50 bottles on the shelf of different things that we were testing. Honestly, not a lot of companies have founders that are that caring about what they're putting in the bottle. They care, of course, but they're not in the weeds like we are.
Right. And I would assume that you're in the weeds, partially, if not wholly, because you come from a craft brew background. You've brewed your own beer. You have, gone and literally taught and written books on the process, right?
Yeah, I'm still a quality manager at heart, and that's very hard to leave. Once you're in that field, you pretty much demand quality. So I'm of the mindset that I can do this the best for my company right now. Eventually, we'll bring someone in that can help support my co-founder, and I. But for now, it's us doing most of the work. We may vet now the formulas with either other scientists or even our flavor houses. We actually have passed on our formulas to the flavor companies that we mostly serve our products with, and say, would you adjust anything? But we're doing most of the work. So it stands out. You'll taste Top Note and you'll say, wow, not only are every single product different, they're distinct. They are all super balanced and super well constructed and super well thought out, because we have put ourselves in the, in the seat of the consumer during that whole process. So.
Right. And you've been doing this, you've been doing Top Note for 10 years, right?
Yeah, now a decade, which is shocking to think. We've been making syrups at least since back to 2013. We've been in the ready to serve format since late 2017. So 2018, 2019, we really got our start. And then of course, kind of COVID changed our world again.
Of course. Now, let me ask this. I mean, we had the conversation about no and low, but, tonics and, sodas and those sort of things are obviously used as mixers. Do you formulate or pair certain of your products, more so with alcohol than others that might be maybe more crafted towards doing a non-alcoholic cocktail?
So we are, I like to say we're Switzerland. We are non-denominational. We can mix with just about anything that you might want to mix with. If it's just juice and a shrub, fantastic. If you have a non-alcoholic spirit that you paid $40 for the bottle and you want to just have a really high quality drink, pick up a top note. We will not overwhelm anything. And then, of course, same thing with your spirits. You don't want to pollute anything that you buy. If you're buying a high quality, tequila or gin, you should buy a nice mixer. And top note, we like to say, is one of the best in the market. We did just win some. We're always kind of astounded when we win awards. But the one that I'm most proud of, we just won this year in 23. We won a double gold in San Francisco, which is
That's a big.
Yeah, the Tasting Alliance is kind of
Yeah.
the big one.
Yep.
And a double gold means that every single judge gave you a gold. And if you know the judges that go to this particular panel, they are some of the most critical bartenders, somms, beverage managers in kind of the country, if not the world. So it meant a lot to double gold, a very kind of minor category, a classic tonic water, but we're the only ones that have done it. So we love to be in this space that's kind of sometimes overlooked, but now, like we said at the beginning of the show, bars and restaurants are no longer overlooking. And I do believe that's transpiring in consumers and in the kitchens of America as well.
Yeah.
People want to serve something special, not only for themselves, but for their guests. And, tonic water, if it's made right, can be that replacement beverage or be part of your replacement story or just a part of your alcohol, serving better.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very, very versatile. You have, the classic tonic. I think you mentioned ginger beer. What else is in your repertoire?
Yeah, we've got 3 tonic waters. Our classic tonic water, which I mentioned, is kind of your classic quinine and lime. It's what you would mix with gin or vodka, or again, some people love it on its own. We have 2 other tonic waters that support that. They were actually our original launches. They're more on that European softer side, almost like a bitters and soda. Our Indian tonic water, which is much lower in sugar, and our bitter lemon. And then we have a ginger beer, a grapefruit soda, and a club soda that rounds out the portfolio. It's a pretty standard portfolio, the bitter lemon and the Indian tonic being our unique spins on the set. But we're not just, I like to say, we're not just quinine water with some flavor, which I think some others in the category have kind of just done that. And every single product we make has a place and a space. Even our club soda, which we designed specifically to mix with brown spirits.
Interesting.
We looked at club soda from a brewer's perspective. I put my brewer's chemistry hat on and said, let's mix some unique minerals in this that we lower the sodium content, because sodium can really, honestly, people don't really look at sodium in their club, but it can make your drink actually taste salty. And that's
Totally.
okay for some bitter drinks. Maybe you might want to have a little saline, but everything else, citrus forward, malt forward drinks, you don't necessarily want the sodium. So we have a little in ours, but we used other salts and magnesium and potassium, and these things really brighten flavor. And that's just a hack. It's a chemistry hack.
You've been listening to Eat Your Heartland Out. This episode was produced by me, Capri Cafaro. Our audio engineers are Liam Warner and Armin Spengen. Theme music by Jason Shaw. You can learn more about the show by visiting heritageradionetwork.org/Eat Your Heartland Out. Eat Your Heartland Out is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.